Hello and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today I'll be showing you how to cycle from Mitcham in southwest London to Wimbledon. This ride takes around 20 minutes and you can do the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. By public transport, the same journey takes around half an hour, so you can save time by getting on your bike. It's also a really pleasant ride. If you find this video useful or you just enjoy watching it, then don't forget to hit subscribe on YouTube, as I try to post new videos just like it every week. I'd also like to say a big thank you to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to contribute as well, you can find a link in the description below the video. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting on the edge of the gyratory that runs through the centre of Mitcham, and we're going to head down Raleigh Gardens. A lot of the streets on this side of Mitcham are part of a historic low traffic neighbourhood that was created a long time before anybody had even heard the term low traffic neighbourhood. Many years ago, Merton Council closed off a lot of the streets to through traffic by putting in a series of bollards. You can see why this area needed attention if you look at the width of the streets around here. They're really quite narrow and it's not really a suitable environment for heavy traffic. If two cars came past each other, they would probably struggle to pass. The first line of bollards is just up here, and you can see there's also a keep clear warning on the ground. In theory, that's supposed to keep the road open for cycles, but the impression that I got was that it's widely ignored, like by this car here, which is parked on a double yellow line, the pavement and the keep clear warning. So don't be surprised if you come down here and find your way blocked by a parked car. That said, as you can see, it's all really quite quiet and you won't run into much traffic at all. Keep an eye out for the blue signs like the one dead ahead there, which are actually pointing the way for us. We're technically following an old London Cycle Network route here, and those signs can be a useful cue to tell us where to go. If you need a bit more help with the wayfinding, you can always download a map of the route, which is linked in the description below the video. There are quite a lot of twists and turns on this route, so if you're planning to do it yourself, I definitely recommend at least having it on your phone. The file is in a standard format that should work on any app or device. Now, as we come to the main road, make sure you check both ways and then cross when there's a gap in the traffic and head for this shared cycle path. Note that it runs behind the bus stop and so is technically a bus stop bypass, like the bus stops on many of TfL's newer cycle routes. It's funny to see things like bus stop bypasses and LTNs implemented decades ago before anybody had a name for them, and now they're all supposedly very controversial. You'll now find yourself on Phipps Bridge Road. This street isn't quite as low traffic as some of the others in this route, although it is still pretty decent to cycle on, at least when I came down here. The street's what's called a closed loop, so in theory anyone driving down here is really just driving to access homes that are on Phipps Bridge Road itself. However, as you can see, there are a lot of homes here and many of them seem to have cars, so there is still a bit more traffic than you'd like. There's also a bus route that runs down here. There's a fascinating little historical oddity around Phipps Bridge Road. We're going to be bearing left onto an even quieter section of the street, and you'll be able to make out a row of cottages there. At the end of that row of cottages, there's what looks like a ruined medieval tower. It's just on the left here, unfortunately covered in a blue tarpaulin and scaffolding at the moment. But of course it's not medieval at all. It was built in the late 18th century as a buttress to stop those cottages from collapsing. The cottages house textile workers because, believe it or not, this area was actually very industrial back then, thanks to the River Wandle, which powered a lot of industry. Unfortunately, the short section here is actually through a car park, so there are vehicle movements, especially on a sunny day like the one that I filmed it on. So do watch out and just make sure that you're keeping an eye on all these cars. Fortunately, things will swiftly improve as we get past this car park and we actually get a nice, reasonably wide path which is shared with pedestrians and kind of a joy to cycle on. As you approach Windsor Avenue, make sure that you slow down and check both ways, as cars can come reasonably quickly over there, and join this new section of path. This is really wide and has a really good surface, and it was actually only opened in February or March 2023, so it's really only about a month old, as of the filming of this video. You are allowed to cycle down here, as you can tell from the little blue signs, and it's not a particularly long stretch of path, but what it does do is plug a real gap in the cycle network around here and makes this route and a lot of other routes that I'll be doing around this bit of southwest London possible. Well done, Merton Council, this is a big improvement. We use the Toucan crossing here, which you're allowed to cycle over, and make sure you go really slowly as you pass through that arch, as it is a bit of a blind corner and someone could be walking the other way. We then rejoin the Wandle Trail, which runs with the river on our right here. I love cycling alongside rivers, especially the Wandle, which I find to be a lovely calming presence. The path's not too bad here, and crucially it does have a fence between us and the river, so you're not in danger of falling in, but just be aware that it is shared with pedestrians, so don't go too quickly and make sure you give everybody plenty of space. Also note that although this looks a little bit secluded, there are some street lights in the side there, so it should be basically okay at night. We then approach another Toucan crossing, which interestingly has its lights on poles on the other side of the street, whereas the previous Toucan we went over had the lights next to the buttons. They're both run by Merton, so I don't really understand why a different design has been used. I guess it's not really that important, but consistency is nice. Note this filter here, by the way. It really should be redesigned because the gap is far too narrow to get, say, a cargo bike or even an adapted cycle or mobility scooter through. It would be a lot better to have a line of bollards, and you could even have a collapsible, lockable bollard if you needed to retain access for emergency services. They lock with the same key that's used on the fire gate that's there currently, so it would be basically the same sort of thing, but with much better accessibility. Generally, I don't think you really see fire gates used on new filters these days, and I think accessibility is the reason. Note the blue sign just there, by the way. It's a useful cue to let us know roughly the right direction that we should be going in. This section of the route we're in now is actually running through another historic Merton low traffic neighbourhood. There isn't any through traffic on these streets thanks to filters like the one we went through. As you can see, the roads are quiet enough that people feel comfortable just walking in the road, which is a really good litmus test of a quiet residential street, although they could just be avoiding those pavements, which have so many driveway crossovers that they look like a roller coaster going up and down. I definitely wouldn't want to go on that with a buggy or a wheelchair, for example. Don't miss this turn off on the right, which starts off as a nice promising wide cycle path, but then goes onto a needlessly narrow path and has a horrible chicane. That path doesn't need to be that narrow, as most of the space between the buildings is actually taken up by that flower bed, and that chicane is definitely illegal under the Equality Act. We turn off left here into Cowper Road, and there is also a useful blue sign pointing it so that you don't miss it. At the end of Cowper Road there is a cycle zebra parallel crossing over Hayden's Road. To use it, you go up on the left onto the pavement and then you cross the road on the cycle portion of it, which has unfortunately weathered away, so the cycle symbols have kind of disappeared, but trust me, that is a cycle crossing. And then you go back onto the main road. Really irritatingly, the road here, South Park Road, was actually closed for minor brickwork when I came down here, so I had to dismount and go around it on the pavement. Obviously the street is particularly quiet today as it doesn't have any through traffic on it due to the closure, but I have been down here a number of times and I've always found it to be decently quiet. The only downside is that some bits like here are a little bit on the narrow side, so if you're unlucky enough to run into two cars at the same time, they'll probably be negotiating how to get past each other, which can hold you up a little bit. This street is actually really quite long and it runs more or less all the way into Wimbledon, so we're going to be following it all the way down there. The reason it's so quiet is because the other end is actually closed to motor traffic, so it doesn't really get used as a rat run by cars, and the only ones that you'll run into on here are ones accessing properties along the road. The name South Park Road refers to the nearby South Park Gardens, which is a Victorian park laid out in 1901. It's very much on the sort of ornamental, ceremonial end of the park spectrum, and it has things like flower beds with roses and ornaments and that kind of thing. It's a nice place to stop if you're in the area, and you can get there really by going down any of the roads to our right. Generally, this street is a good way into Wimbledon from the east, and I'm going to be using it in a lot of other routes which have opened up recently thanks to improvements in infrastructure. Now, you might be able to see a church facade looming out of the distance. Oddly, it doesn't actually seem to be a church anymore, rather a part of the Centre Court shopping centre, and specifically a branch of Boots if you look at the sign. This filter here is no through traffic except for cycles and emergency services vehicles, which I think can be explained by the fact that there is a police station just there. Presumably they didn't want to go all the way around. I've dismounted here and I'm just going to walk on the pavement just to go around the corner to show you how close everything is. You can see the station and the centre of the Wimbledon Broadway just here. So we really have found ourselves in the middle of Wimbledon, all the way from Mitcham, on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. Make sure you hit subscribe if you enjoyed that, and thanks very much to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon. You can find a link in the description below the video if you would like to do so as well. Let me know in the comments what you think of that, and I will see you guys again next time.